hopefully this answers the question at least a little bit so that next time a designer hears, can you make that pop? You have a point of reference and maybe you can even share it with your client and say, is this what you mean? We're trying to help experts be experts. And so we want to be experts on what does it mean when a client says, make it pop?
I'm really excited to talk about the results of the test today. This one was really fun and colorful and a little bit different than what we have been testing. Can you talk about why we decided to test what makes something pop?
Yeah, so you can see by my attire, and anybody who knows me, I am anti-pop. Um, this is not my realm. I'm more of a B2B guy with my design work, but it's one of these things, one of these kind of cringy, painful things that I think all designers can relate with when a client comes to you and they look at your work and you've put a lot of thought and effort into it and you feel confident and they say, "Can you make it pop?" And you just sit there and see the little and cringe and say, sure, I can do that. What do you mean? We're doing a whole series on this. We're going to do what does it mean when a client says make it pop and make it edgy is another one of these things that you hear a lot as a designer that's kind of like, what the heck does that mean? Or visual interest, the more politically correct version of the earlier two. Because I think it's a good way to show what this tool does, right? It bridges the gap between what's inside an audience's head, whether it's an audience of one with just a client, or if it's an audience of thousands, where you're actually going to the intended audience and seeing where they align on these things. And this is not to be down on clients, right? They're using the vocabulary that they have. They kind of have a feel or a sense, maybe not the theater of mind that a designer has when we hear this, to really look at a bunch of things and put together a mood board to test this. But hopefully this answers the question at least a little bit so that next time a designer hears, can you make that pop? You have a point of reference and maybe you can even share it with your client and say, is this what you mean? So that was kind of the thought behind it.
Yeah, and hopefully the results and what we conclude will give clarity for the designers to go back and kind of prompt their clients a little bit more on the brief and what question to ask to actually get to the nitty gritty of what they mean when they say that they want it to pop.
Absolutely. We're trying to help experts be experts. And so we want to be experts on what the heck does it mean when somebody says make it pop. So here we are.
So I took the lead on curating these boards. We chose to do two boards just to hold attention with the audience that we were testing. We didn't want to throw too much at them. When I was searching for images, I scoured on Pinterest and we used terms like bold, colorful, pop. I was trying to get a mix of textures, colors, fonts, all those different design elements, and just picked a bunch of images that stood out to me. And we tested it with our audience to see what they thought.
Yeah, and you did a great job. And this is what any designer would do, right? If we were designing for quote unquote make it pop, that was the creative direction that we received. We'd hit resource material either in our own libraries or on Pinterest or something like that, even Google. And then we'd search for a bunch of images and look at them and consider, okay, does this pop? And Pinterest got you a really good way there, right? And it's good for that. But what Constellations does so well is take all of those ideas that one designer has and puts it in front of a lot of people to find out, okay, where's the alignment on this? And this was a lot of fun to do. When I took the test, I really scrutinized and thought about, which ones really felt like they popped to me and which ones really felt like they didn't. And there's some really clear alignment here when we got our results. So I'm just going to go through the boards really fast and I'll kind of turn off our dots here so we can see the images without the points and how they kind of pop up with the points. And we can see on this first one, black and white, it's very, very bold, right? I think that adjective still applies. This is kind of unsettling or attention grabbing. I thought this one popped, but it's lacking something here for our audience. I might have been the only green dot on that one, but we see some real not poppy things, and then some others, some bold type yellow breaks the trend on some of the other things we're looking at. This one did rank high for pop. And our second board, I think one that surprised me was this one right here. I felt like that was going to be a solid, very poppy graphic, but it was fairly contested. And the one to the left of it as well was fairly contested, even maybe dominant negative. Just going to turn off our points here, and you can see that it has a lot of the characteristics of some of the things that rank high, but it was lacking something.
I thought it was funny too when I was showing you these boards before we put them out. We had a little bit of a disagreement on some of the images that were going in it because I thought they popped and you didn't think so. And I think that's a testament to why constellations work so well, is because it's not just your opinion or my opinion, it's gathering a bunch of opinions, and then you can really see those patterns once you see all these dots cluster.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you ask one person what they think about something, it's an opinion. When you ask two people, it's a disagreement. When you ask 1,000 people, you have statistical data. Now, we didn't have 1,000 people, obviously. It was a relatively small study, between 20 and 30 people, but it's still enough to see trends and make certain assumptions about a particular audience or even a broader audience, right? And that's what we got. So as we go down to the resonance and resistance arrays, this is where you can really see comparatively what pops and what doesn't. So on the left, we'll look at the AI analysis, but some of the things that jumped out in that analysis was that they're very typographic. And in fairness, most of our swatches were fairly typographic. So further testing on that component might be necessary, but predominantly pink and magenta, kind of a reddish purple. Um, Lots of organic type, either in the form of letters that look hand rendered. We have the bold, bubbly letters here. We have the more scripty, kind of 60s style stuff happening here, even this legacy thing. But also these 3D things that look like they have a physicality to them, some more realistic than others, but all kind of really bubbly. Our contrast items are things that ranked low for pop, even though they have bold colors and high contrast things. Black and white was a clear loser in this one, right? There has to be some color, and pink is overwhelmingly the one that wins for ranking high for pop.
Although we included a lot of pink in the board, it still managed to outrank the other colors like the blues or the black and white.
Yeah, and that's something again, if we did more testing and we tried to do all pink things, we could maybe figure out, all right, within the context of we know pink ranks high for pop, let's get really down to some other elements that we can support this notion of what looks like it pops. We could test that. Or on the flip side of that, we could also put things in a board or and test for when there's no pink in the mix. All right, what looks like it pops then and try to see what some patterns are. But you can see right off the bat, like it's more muted. These are print-based media. This is some kind of a photograph of a fuzzy thing. It's pink, but it's not super saturated pink. This is high contrast, but it's still a little bit gray, right? We have the red or pink, and then the muted magenta. It just doesn't quite do it. And then black and white just didn't do great. And so these were some of the things that were maybe expected to a certain degree, but now we have the nuance to really talk about them and look at them and say, okay, you really have to get that high contrast and that bold, bright, saturated color, preferably pink, if you want to rank really, really high for this idea of pop.
Yeah, the images, the participants really favored the colorful visuals over the ones that had more neutral palettes. And that's definitely prevalent in these results. And then in the neutral array, it's kind of a mix between the two. It's more cool toned with slight pops of color.
Yeah, the contested ones are for me becoming more and more the most interesting in the bunch, right? So this one, I thought for sure this would have popped between the facial expression, the moment that photographer caught where the subject's hair is kind of flying around, the face is clearly in a loud moment of expression, and then we have this really colorful quickly rendered type. To me, that said pop really, really kind of crystal clear. I thought that would have ranked higher than it did. Didn't rank poorly. Just find it here. So we look at number five, 58%. So above half, but not as bold as some other things. And then this one in particular too, because it had the right color. It had a lot of the elements that we're seeing in the resonance board, but I think it's the geometric pattern and the geometric type that somehow toned it down enough that this became contested and it didn't rank as high as some of the other things in here that look like it did.
Yeah, and one of our points that we focus on in the AI report is complexity without clarity. And I think in a lot of these images, sometimes the complexity of them flattens them so that they don't actually stand out as much as they were intended to.
Yeah, so let's flip over to the AI report. And obviously, we're not going to read this, but there were some really good insights that our AI models found. We talked about color, we talked about contrast, boldness, all these things. But the three things that it recognized and said, if you want to make it pop, it needs to have immediacy. It's not reward after contemplation. It's about instant recognition. So there has to be this quickness to it that when you see it, you know exactly what the point is. And then the warmth within contrast. The pop requires high contrast, but not coldly. So again, the hot colors, the warm colors, the very saturated colors, not black and white, not muted. It has to be bright and bold in terms of color, which that makes sense. That's exactly what I would have expected. But so much so that some of the other things that I thought popped and that were bold, they don't to this audience at least. And then materiality without disillusion. And I thought that was a great recognition by it as well. The 3D glossy surfaces, to me, they looked very sugary. They looked sweet and saturated and almost sticky. The pink fuzz failed. That was a surprise to me, but all the other ones that are dripping or liquid and glossy, those things ranked really, really high. The gestalt of these three components, when you're evaluating what pops, people need to understand it at a glance, and it has to be legible, warm, and have kind of the stickiness to it.
What would you tell a creative team when prompting their clients? The client comes to you and says, I want it to pop. How would you advise them to direct that conversation to actually dig into what they mean?
I think it's important to be looking at visuals when using these terms. You know, that's part of why we created the tool, is that this visual language doesn't translate well to, spoken language all the time. What does modern mean? What does make it pop mean? It depends so much on very nuanced context and the individual's personal experience when they use these terms, and also just their ability to have the theater of mind to envision what it is they're trying to articulate. There's a huge divide between one person and another, and that person and audiences. And so this tool lets you look at it, point to it, say, I like this, and then begin to articulate from there. Lead with visuals. So if you don't have a Constellation subscription, definitely do a mood board. You're never going to understand what your clients want, and your clients aren't going to understand the visual nature of what you do unless you're all looking at a mood board together and talking through things that you can see. And that's a great first step. But if you really want to get in the mind of your audience, test those visuals further with your audience, and you'll have a really solid connection with them. The next time you have a client that says make it pop, you can visit our website and you can review the full analysis and discuss it with them, and it might get them to think a little bit more about the data and some of the forces in science under the hood of your creative process, so that they take it a little more seriously, and that you can get to a more clear direction and a better outcome for them as well.
Yeah, both of you understanding where each other's coming from and seeing that alignment on why things work and why other things won't. You can read the full report from this study at constellations.app. While you're there, explore how Constellations helps creative teams gain clarity, or share an idea you'd like us to explore in a future study.